government.
It is absolutely wrong.
Right.
I can't agree with that.
That's right. I don't agree with that.
How on earth can they tell me that I must take one and they take 11?
Party leaders are against the rise, so will it happen? Also tonight. The security companies accused of making tens of millions by overcharging for tagging criminals. A regimental escort for Fusilier Lee Rigby, murdered in Woolwich. He'll be buried tomorrow. Taking protests to new heights, environmental activists scaled the Shard in London, the highest building in Western Europe. What a way to announce your arrival in Test cricket. The Aussie bowler who showed the batsmen how it's done.
Tonight on BBC London, the mother of the French cyclist killed on the Mayor's superhighway says her daughter never stood a chance. And HS2 under review calls for the government to look again at the cost of the scheme.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. An official watchdog has proposed an 11% pay rise for MPs after the next election, taking their salaries to £74,000 a year. The plan has run into a barrage of criticism, with the leaders of the three main Westminster parties opposing a rise when so many public sector workers are facing a financial squeeze. But the head of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority said the expenses scandal was partly the result of MPs not being paid enough. Here's our political editor, Nick Robinson.
Thinking of a career change? Come to Westminster. You'll work long hours but get long holidays at a pretty decent salary, which, unlike most people's, could be about to increase an awful lot to £74,000 a year. That's 11% higher than it is now. Don't shout at your elected representatives. It's not their fault. The ideas come from this man, the chairman of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. The question many people will ask is a really simple one. Why pay MPs more, and why on earth think about doing it now?
Why do it now? Well, there's never a good time. That's the reason why it's never been done, and that's the reason why we're in the mess we are in. It's getting it right for a generation, solving it, grasping the nettle, and we say that pay, pension, remuneration in resettlement and so on, taken together, need to be addressed and addressed now.
The idea is now open for public consultation. So here goes. Neville,
Yes.
I have a job offer for you.
What is it?
Do you fancy a job offer?
Because 74. Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting that sort of money.
This is an independent report, says there.
Yes, I know, but it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong.
Right.
Yeah. I can't agree with that.
That's right. I don't agree with that.
How on earth can they tell me that I must take one and they take 11?
Would you like a new job? There we are. Is the pay rise good?
The pay rise for them is all right. They got a big responsibility.
And they should get the money.
They should get the money.
It's an extraordinary pay rise given current times. Where
What would you get?
1%, I'm guessing at best this year.
When people learned what their members of parliament were claiming in expenses a few years ago, there was fury. The result was a decision that MPs would no longer decide their own pay, expenses or pensions. And today is what's resulted. The new package being proposed is not just a salary increase. It also involves an end to MPs' generous final salary pensions. No more free evening meals, a cut in taxis home except after 11 at night, and a big cut in golden goodbyes, payments made when MPs lose their jobs. So are political leaders lining up to agree with the independent regulator they voted to create? Not exactly.
I don't think MPs should be getting a 10% pay rise when nurses, teachers are facing either pay freezes or very low increases, and others in the private sector are facing similar circumstances.
MPs are incredibly well paid at the moment anyway, and ministers too. It's an absolute privilege to be an MP or a minister. So, you know, this organisation, IPSA, it's a bit of a silly organisation really, and as far as I'm concerned, pay rise, they can stick it.
I would urge members of the public who have strong views on this to make their views known in the consultation. My own view is well known. I don't think it is justifiable.
The reply to all that in today's report is to point out that the current MP's pay rate is lower than that for police chief superintendents. head teachers and senior civil servants. And what's more, they've been slipping back over the years. If the public say no to you in the consultation, if political leaders say no to you, will you listen?
Well, of course we'll listen. What we'll do, having listened, is for us.
Very few MPs want to be seen saying publicly that they think they deserve the pay rise, but some will.
I have this question in my mind. If someone's Member of Parliament is not worth the money, is it better to change the person and get a better person, or is it better to lower the pay? And on the whole, I think you want to have proper pay for proper people.
Some, including the Labour and Lib Dem leaders, say they won't take the increase. Just one problem, though. The independent regulator says they'll pay every MP the same, whether they like it or not.
And let's talk to Nick now in Westminster. Nick, with so much opposition, we heard from all three parties there in your report, is this thing actually going to happen?
Well, you've got a standoff, haven't you? You've got the Westminster political leaders saying, we can't possibly do this, forgetting to add, it's not up to them whether it happens or not. Then you've got the head of the independent parliamentary watchdog saying, tough, you gave us the job, you messed it up when you were in charge, we're in charge now, and we may listen a bit, but frankly, we'll do what we think is right. In between those two groups are, of course, you, the public, because there is now a consultation on whether this should happen or not. The politicians say, look, voters will never wear this. What IPSA says, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, is when you explain to people that there are other cuts, a squeeze on pensions and expenses and resettlement, the polls show that people are much more willing to tolerate this. I have an instinct about this, George. It won't get settled for a long time. Nobody will get this pay rise till 2015 at the very earliest. I suspect it might just feature in another event that year. Oh yeah, there's a general election.
Nick, thank you very much. Thank you. Two major security companies, G4S and Serco, have been accused of overcharging the government by tens of millions of pounds for tagging criminals. The Justice Secretary says the government was billed for offenders who were already in prison or who'd left the country, and in some cases even after they died. Our Home Affairs correspondent Jude Kelly reports.
Tagging has been big business for G4S and Serco, but now it's being claimed that as well as making money, they were overcharging millions as well. In the case of G4S, the Serious Fraud Office has been called in. Details of a recent audit came from the Justice Secretary.
It included charges for people who were back in prison and had had their tags removed, for people who had left the country, and those who had never been tagged in the first place, but who'd instead been returned to court. There are a small number of cases where charging continued for a period when the subject was known to have died.
Tagging is a key part of the way criminals are monitored in the community. The electronic ankle bracelet is meant to ensure that offenders comply with their bail conditions. Tags are a cheaper alternative to custody. It was in 2005 that the government awarded the current contracts to G4S and Serco. In the last year, these contracts have been worth a total of £107 million for the two companies. It's estimated that on any one day in England and Wales, 15,000 people are wearing a tag.
It's extremely important that all the contracts for these companies are suspended to enable a proper audit to be undertaken of the billing arrangements for all the government contracts that they've received so far.
In a statement, G4S said, "We believe that we are delivering our electronic monitoring service in a completely open and transparent way." And the statement went on to say that in the past they had been officially described as offering good value for money to the taxpayer. In the Commons, the Secretary of State also criticised his own department, the Ministry of Justice. He said that 5 years ago, managers here discovered there were some problems with the billing system when it came to tags, but nothing was done to address the issue.
There is a belief amongst politicians, it seems, that privatisation is the magic bullet solution. But I don't think it is, and particularly if you are doing it cheaply. And that is, at the moment, what our austerity government's looking to do. Like anything, if you do it cheaply, then you compromise on quality.
It's understood that with the tagging contract, G4S is reliant on information from the courts when it comes to who is and isn't tagged. But this is not the first time, of course, it's been in trouble over a contract. At the Olympics, the army had to be called in after it failed to recruit enough security guards. Now, once again, G4S has questions to answer. June Kelly, BBC News.
The National Health Service will face an annual funding gap of £30 billion by the end of the decade. That's the warning from the head of the NHS in England. Sir David Nicholson said that a failure to reorganise the service would mean the funding target could not be met. But saving money could mean removing certain services, as our political correspondent Vicky Young reports.
The health service is under pressure like never before. New treatments can be expensive, unhealthy lifestyles are leading to long-term illnesses, and we're all living longer. It all means the NHS budget is being squeezed. The head of the health service in England says the time for tinkering with the system is over.
You get into a place where you're simply reducing the numbers of staff on every ward, and that is completely unacceptable to us in the NHS. And it's a really stark choice for us. Do we go for service change, changing the way we deliver service to patients, or do we sleepwalk into a position where we reduce the quality to our patients?
In England, the NHS funding gap between its budget and the rising costs adds up to £20 billion by 2014-15. And the budget is forecast to go up by just 0.01% in 2015-16, which could leave the health service having to find an extra £30 billion of savings. This is a blunt warning that if the NHS is to carry on providing free treatment without a drop in quality, then things have to change. That could mean that services like A&D and maternity wards aren't on everyone's doorstep. And in the past, politicians and the public have been very reluctant to sign up to that. Here in Trafford, campaigners have been fighting plans to downgrade services. But today, ministers confirmed that the A&E unit would go and intensive care and emergency surgery would close altogether.
Our primary objective as a government must be for the NHS to provide the best service for patients. Sometimes that means taking difficult decisions. Both of the decisions that I'm announcing today fall into that category.
Concentrating services in fewer hospitals will deliver better care, according to many medical organisations, but patients don't always agree.
Any longer journey time to get to the treatment that people need means that care is being put at risk, I think, and that if there's delays in people getting treatment, that could put lives at risk as well.
Reorganising hospitals isn't the only plan. Patients are being told to take more responsibility for their own health, and small GP practices might be forced to join together. NHS leaders know much of this is unpopular, but say it's time for politicians to be honest with voters about the problems facing the health service. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
The prison sentence given to the broadcaster Stuart Hall after he admitted sex offences is to be reviewed by the Court of Appeal. Hall pleaded guilty to 14 counts of indecent assault and was jailed for 15 months. The Attorney-General is requesting the review after receiving complaints that the sentence was unduly lenient. A man has died after being shot by police with a taser gun. The 23-year-old, named as Jordan Begley, died following a disturbance at a house in Greater Manchester. The police watchdog has opened an investigation, as our Home Affairs correspondent Matt Prodger reports.
Just after 8 last night, police say they were called to this street following reports of a disturbance involving a man with a knife. On arrival, they fired a taser at 23-year-old Jordan Begley. What happened next is unclear, but Mr. Begley suffered what police called a medical episode and died in hospital. He was well known to neighbours.
He was a working guy. He got up every morning, went to work. He worked 7 days a week, you know what I mean? He was a nice lad. He was one of the nicest lads you'll ever meet.
The police force involved in this incident, Greater Manchester, last year used tasers more frequently than any other force in the country. The Independent Police Complaints Commission is currently investigating the death. It's already reviewing the use of tasers across England and Wales. A taser is a brand of stun gun used by 1 in 10 police officers in the UK. It fires a high-voltage charge designed to disable but not harm. In only a minority of cases where a taser is used by police is it actually fired, but it's a controversial tactic. There have been 7 taser incidents in England and Wales where people have died, and the cause wasn't initially clear. In 4 of the deaths, no link was found to the use of a taser. The other 3 are under investigation, including the latest. The weapons are supposed to be used as a last resort, like in this case against a man holding a knife to his throat outside Buckingham Palace in February. But there are an increasing number of legal actions being brought against the police by people who have had such stun guns used on them.
The use is, in my view, breaching the policy and the guidance of the use of taser in this country, and the training does not allow officers to take into account the risk and consequences of the taser.
It has yet to be determined whether the taser itself caused Jordan Begley's death, and the full facts of what happened here won't be known for some time. Matt Prodger, BBC News, Manchester.
And the time is very nearly 16 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The parliamentary watchdog proposes an 11% pay rise for MPs. And still to come, England struggle in the first test against Australia. They lose 2 early wickets at the start of their second innings.
Later on BBC London News, patients are told their surgeon is under review after investigations reveal an abnormally high number of mistakes. And a quicker route to Surrey as a new road bridge is opened across the Thames.
It remains the deadliest conflict for British troops since 1945, and today there's been a service of thanksgiving to remember those who fought in the Korean War, which ended 60 years ago. British forces served as part of a UN coalition after communist North Korea invaded the South in June 1950. About 100,000 British troops were involved in the conflict, which ended 3 years later with a ceasefire. Over 1,000 were killed, while 1,000 more were taken prisoner by the North Korean forces or went missing. Our correspondent Robert Hall now reports on what became known as the Forgotten War.
Parading under brilliant blue skies, the men who remember their service in a conflict so often overshadowed by the Second World War. As young conscripts, they sail for Korea to fight in extreme temperatures across hostile terrain and often hugely outnumbered.
In the dusty yard of a Korean school, they assemble to salute the men who held the Imjin line.
Some are survivors of the battle at the Imjin River, where the Gloucestershire Regiment lost 2/3 of its strength to the Chinese force surrounding its positions.
There were Chinese all around us. We were absolutely surrounded. They gave us really a pasting because there were so many of them. In actual fact, their crossfire was even probably killing their own men, probably, because they were all around us, you see.
Under the vaulted roof of the Abbey, veterans shared their memories with representatives from South Korea and the 22 nations which had fought under the UN flag. Memories of 3 years during which nearly 2 million lives were lost, but long-term peace was never achieved. Memories of savage fighting and brutal captivity.
They used telephone cable, which they put round the fingers, then they took it round your neck, up to a beam, pulled it down, stood you one foot and wound it round your other ankle. In fact, they told me, should my leg give way, I hadn't been murdered, I'd committed suicide.
Korea is still a divided country, but the South has never forgotten the men who came from around the world and held the line.
I believe it was freedom, it was for democracy, and it was for prosperity. The sacrifices by the British soldiers and generals have not been wasted in vain if you look at what Korea is today.
For the old men on parade, some for the last time, that is reason enough to hold their heads high. Robert Hall, BBC News, Central London.
A vigil is being held in Greater Manchester ahead of the funeral tomorrow of the murdered soldier Lee Rigby. Fusilier Rigby was killed as he returned to Woolwich Barracks in London in May. 2 men have been charged with his murder and will stand trial later this year. Ed Thomas reports now from Bury.
To the sound of drums and applause, Fusilier Rigby's regimental colleagues led the way. Not just friends, but soldiers he fought with. and into Bury Parish Church. They were followed by Lee Rigby's family. His 2-year-old son Jack, wearing the colours of Manchester United, his father's team. But for them, people in Bury came out to remember a young soldier, his service, and one of their own.
Can't understand what his parents and family are going through.
But you're here for them today?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We're all with you. We're all there with you, fighting for you. Yeah.
The family?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Giving them support, because that's what they need right now.
The horror of Lee Rigby's final moments in Woolwich was seen by many. For those here who know what it means to serve, to risk life, his death is hard to accept.
We were absolutely horrified to hear about his death, and especially the manner of his dying. And so, in that sense, it does emphasise being here today for his family, and especially, for his mother.
Lee was a Fusilier, still is a Fusilier, and the Fusiliers are a family, and that's what we're here, to say farewell to a family friend.
This was a private vigil service for the family and friends of Lee Rigby, but the message to them from the hundreds who came here was a simple one, that in these moments, they are not alone. And in the Fusiliers' hometown of Middleton, flags fly at this unofficial memorial. Here, birthdays are remembered, a sign that Lee Rigby has not been forgotten.
It's really important, it's just like a tribute to him, and that we're all behind him, and after tomorrow we're still there for him.
Because tomorrow, hundreds here will again line the streets for Lee Rigby's funeral. Strangers standing together to support those who will miss him most. Ed Thomas, BBC News, Bury.
Protesters campaigning against the drilling of oil in the Arctic have climbed up the Shard in London, Western Europe's highest skyscraper. The activists from Greenpeace said they wanted to send a message to the oil firm Shell. Police are continuing to monitor the situation, as Sarah Campbell reports.
A protest at the very highest level. 6 female climbers have spent more than 12 hours scaling the Shard in a well-planned stunt. They had hoped to install a piece of art 300 metres above London's streets. Their aim, to raise awareness about oil drilling in the Arctic. They started their climb at 4 o'clock this morning, using steel columns on the outside of the building to anchor their ropes.
They're very well equipped and highly skilled. And I think health and safety is of absolute paramount importance in something like this. And we wouldn't do it unless we felt absolutely secure that they were able to do it.
Down here by the Thames, there's a slight breeze, but up there, according to the Shard's management, the wind's gusting at up to 40 miles per hour. Their maintenance teams aren't allowed on the outside of the building today because it's considered too dangerous. And those who'd paid to see the Shard's view of London were left disappointed. The viewing deck was closed due to safety concerns.
We don't know what it is about, so maybe it's something what they should protest about. Just
not here and not today.
People want to make a statement about something that's very important, it's understandable, but of course you have to think of the safety aspects all the time.
The oil company Shell have released a statement saying they respect the right to engage in free and frank exchange of views, as long as it's done with safety in mind. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
The former Director General of the BBC, Mark Thompson, has agreed to appear before MPs to answer questions about payoffs to executives at the corporation. He says he wants to clear up some inaccuracies following yesterday's Public Accounts Committee hearing, which looked at payments to senior staff totalling millions of pounds. Actress Anna Wing, known to millions as Lou Beale in EastEnders, has died at the age of 98.
Your son's still snoring in the front room like a pig.
She played the formidable head of the Beale family for 3 years when the programme started in 1985. Anna Wing kept working into her 90s in a career which spanned more than 6 decades across TV, radio, film and theatre.